So hello and welcome to another episode of Sassi Talks. On today's programme we have Tania Diggory, who is an international mental health speaker. She's also the founder of an organisation called Karma, which focuses on training entrepreneurs and businesses in how to nurture better mental health and well-being in the workplace. She's also a burnout expert. Now that doesn't mean that she's here to tell you how to burn out, but hopefully she will be able to give us some tips on how to prevent it. So Tanya, thank you very much for being on Sassi Talks.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Savahna.
Excellent. So I've heard a lot about you and I've read a lot about your background to get a good understanding of what you've been doing. You had 3 businesses before you were 20, and over the past number of years you have been training over 300 different businesses in this area. You've also experienced your own burnout. So tell us your story.
Well, so thank you so much for the introduction. From my story, it really starts with the second business that I was running. And so I originally launched a dance school, and then that developed into an international dance events company. So completely different industry to where I'm working now. But basically, the second business I was running, events can be very high stress and very, on the pulse and a lot to do. And so I was kind of struggling with managing all that and actually delegating effectively. And so I ended up going through a period of really high stress, ended up just keeping going, that classic, I'm fine, I'll keep going. And just wasn't really balancing things well in my life. So things became very consumed by work. And then I eventually ended up burning out.
How can you describe that? What was burnout for you?
So it was extreme fatigue. It was kind of a detachment in the end from my work, from things that were meaningful in my life. I became very reclusive, when I sort of hit that limit of what I could cope with. Felt incredibly tired, emotional, like I just couldn't cope, like things felt very much out of my control. And a very consistent level of feeling really low. So feelings of depression, I would say, really seeped in as well. Feeling out of control and not knowing sort of what to do really to help myself.
It's so common though, isn't it, to keep on going, especially if you're driven and it's your own business and you're keen to see it grow and there's a lot of things to do, and potentially at the beginning there isn't the resources to have a lot of support that you may need at that time. So knowing when to stop has got to be the hardest thing of all. And when you start to develop physical symptoms, what's the tipping point when you say, okay, this is enough?
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. Our body has a phenomenally smart way of signaling to us to pay attention when something doesn't feel right. But we don't necessarily always pay attention to that, right? Because we're so busy, or we're going from one thing to the next, or, mental health is silent. It's intangible. You can't see it. So it's easy to just put a smile on and keep going, and no one really has to know if you're struggling. So thankfully that stigma is starting to, get less, but it's still an issue. And so there is a defining point between, when you experience pressure versus higher stress levels versus chronic stress, which leads to burnout, which is the sum of mental, physical and emotional exhaustion, like a car running with no fuel. There's just nothing left to give. So when we are stressed, our body holds on to tension, right? And it stores tension in the body in different ways, whether it's tight chest or muscle aches or, headaches. And so when we keep holding on to stress, it keeps building. And that's where we increase our levels of anxiety or mood fluctuations until we get to a point where we struggle to cope. So when we're holding on to that stress, we really need to come out of stress. There needs to be ebbs and flows. So the issue comes when we're holding on to high levels of stress over a long period of time that's unresolved. And that's what ends up escalating into burnout.
So what would you say is the difference between burnout and stress, really, if you had to really spell it out? Because some stress is good stress. We need stress to do certain things. But knowing when we've reached that point and we're moving into another arena.
Well, we've actually written a blog called The 5 Stages of Burnout, which is our highest performing blog. It's our most popular one, which kind of identifies.
What are the 5 steps of burnout, Tanya? You must tell us.
That sort of that honeymoon phase we could talk about is like the first step where, say you're starting on a new project or, feeling inspired by something you're just getting involved in. And so there's that almost like anticipation, like what you were just saying then about, it's not necessarily a negative thing. It's that pressure you feel, but it actually helps you to take action on something. It helps you focus. It motivates you. So you might be feeling a little bit stressed, but more anticipating what's happening. So you're quite excited. There might be more excitement going on there. And then that moves on to, the sort of onset of stress. So this will be more where you're noticing the stress levels rise. Maybe you're realizing the magnitude of what you're getting involved in as a project or with your business or work, etc. And you're understanding that, the kind of level of commitment and where stresses might be manifesting. And it gets a little bit more difficult to cope, but you've got maybe a pretty good sense of control still at this stage, but you're noticing that tightness, tension, pain or aches, maybe, fatigue in your body. But that like lifting up into a longer period of time starts to elevate into more chronic stress. So, it can be increased heart rate, feeling that knot in your stomach, having appetite changes, like I say, increased pain or tension in the body, but also behaviorally becoming a bit more overwhelmed, perhaps disengaged or detached from what you're doing a bit more, perhaps looking to substances.
So this is stage 3. This is stage 3 now.
Exactly, yeah. So more chronic stress levels where it's higher level, where you're not having that coming out. There's no sort of ebbs and flows. It's feeling it on a consistent level. So it's more noticing that your habits towards like chocolate, coffee, alcohol, drugs or things like that might be more towards coping. I need this to cope better, and that sort of cause and effect. And then that can escalate into a high level of fluctuations of anxiety and mood. And then that's where it eventually reaches that point, that tipping point where it becomes burnout. So if beyond that stage, you're feeling more you're noticing more like chronic levels of fatigue, of chronic stress buildups, and it becomes a lot more difficult to cope. And it's almost this kind of numbness, that you might feel, that it's just so difficult to know what to do, and you're in a state of perhaps hopelessness. So what I would say is that the brain is made to adapt and to change. So even if someone's in that state, there's always a way that you can come back, and there's always hope, and there's so much support available nowadays to help people.
Excellent. Well, we're going to get into the different types of strategies for the workplace, but also for entrepreneurs. And you talked about reaching this burnout point. How long would an individual typically stay in that state for, and would they still be carrying on with activities, but just at a very kind of at an unhealthy place, or would you have to just completely stop and spend a few weeks in bed?
There's no one size fits all when it comes to mental health. So it's very difficult to say categorically, if someone's in this state for X amount of time, then this will happen. Or if they do this, then that will happen, because it is so down to the individual. For one person, it could be like, a lot of build-ups over lots of things over a long period of time. And then it's like the straw that broke the camel's back. And then suddenly it's like a downward spiral. For someone else, it might be a shorter period of time, but the impact of the circumstances that's creating that high stress and burnout is just too much to cope. So for them, it would hit them perhaps quite like sooner. So, I mean, what I would suggest is just starting to heighten your sense of self-awareness in noticing what is your sense of norm, your state of peace, your state of contentment, feeling calm and, confident in yourself. And then start to notice when things start to tip that scale, when you start to notice things go off kilter, when you notice that those little signs and symptoms are creeping up, that you are feeling stressed. At that point, recognizing that and giving yourself permission to take a step back and utilize strategies or relationships you have in your life, people you can speak to that you trust, to manage those stress levels so it doesn't creep up into that higher state of stress and potentially burnout.
So key. So moving into the workplace then, how would individuals manage in a potential burnout situation in the workplace? And of course, we've gone through this period of lockdown where individuals are working remotely at home. So there's another layer of challenges that go with working remotely, working by yourself, and then making that transition back into the workplace environment. What are the risks?
Well, it's interesting because the World Health Organization not long ago recognize burnout as like a legitimate, diagnosis. And there's been a lot of really fascinating studies around occupational burnout in recent years, which I can share some with you as well. It's really important for companies to take stock of the importance of mental health and well-being, because not only do senior leaders within organizations have a legal duty of care to their staff and their health and safety, but what we're realizing now is that it's actually really costly long term for organizations to not focus on this. Not only costly in terms of people's health and well-being, but literally from a financial perspective on the bottom line, because currently over 91 million working days are lost in the UK alone every year due to poor mental health, and It's costing organizations between 44 and 47 billion a year, and that's more than for any other sickness related absence issue. So there's a clear business case for why this is so important, and so having a culture at work that nurtures wellness and prioritizes it, so encourages staff to look after themselves, to be open and have a sense of openness and ease in relation to talking about mental health, so that people can feel open, to discuss with their manager or with someone they trust if things are getting too much. Because we really need to recognize that everyone's levels of tolerance and resilience is completely unique to them. What stresses one person out won't stress another, and vice versa, so it's no good just comparing and saying, oh, well, we all work in a stressful environment, or we're all trying our best. It's like, yes, but everyone's levels of abilities is different and everyone's needs are different. So having that space which nurtures and cultivates trust and rapport is vital. So people being able to share is like the first step, because if you can't share with your manager or you can't share with anyone at work, and then workplace stress is just getting to you, then it might continue to escalate. But giving yourself permission to just take regular breaks during the day. It sounds simple, but a lot of people find that very difficult. But the reality is that our brain works in cycles of processing information because it's taking in so much all the time. So if we're just, working through any breaks, working through lunch, just getting loads of stuff done, working overtime, increasing studies have shown that working longer hours doesn't make you more productive. And actually, when you take take a break every hour and a half or so, even just 10, 15 minutes, it helps you come back to your work with higher levels of productivity, more creativity, and more switched on focus, so you're able to get your best work done. So there's that question about quality over quantity there as well.
Absolutely, that makes sense. I mean, there is also still this stigma around mental health, and there's a fear of raising potential issues in the workplace for fear that it might affect the way that you're seen or your work or whatever it is. And so, what might be helpful or easy ways to have these conversations with managers to try to help them to recognise that there's a need for positive mental health, a positive mental health attitude in the workplace?
Yeah. So, I mean, the one-to-ones that you have with your managers and your team meetings are really important, starting points, for opening up the conversation around mental health, because it's a fact that when you have people who are feeling well and healthy in themselves, they're going to be able to give more of themselves to their work and to their colleagues, etc. So by just simply opening up questions within your one-to-ones to say, how are you doing as an individual? How are you in general? Not just to do with work, and how are things going with work, but also outside of work. Is there any issues that you want to raise? That having that openness and willingness to have those conversations and hold a sensitive space, of course, if there is something to share. But also within your team meetings, perhaps starting them off in a memorable way where you're not just coming in and getting on with the agenda. You never know where people's minds are at when they're coming into a space like this, what kind of day they've had so far, what else might be going on in their lives. But, one of my favorite phrases is we're human beings, not human doings, right? We're not created to just be doing all the time. That. We're not robots. So we do need time to switch off, reflect, reassess how things are going. So even just posing questions like, what are you doing for yourself this week? How are you making time for self-care around work and other aspects of your life? And really following through on that. When you have a culture at work where people role model those healthy habits, not just talk about them, but also role model them and explain, what they do and what helps them, then, that starts to boost morale. It can boost productivity and actually how connected people feel in the workplace as well. So rather than feeling like it's just something that you have to bring up or let's talk about mental health, it's like, just how are you doing in yourself? And is there any other support that you need? It's a starting point.
So Tanya, obviously a lot of people are still working from home and for the foreseeable future may have to continue working from home. You've recently written a book that focuses specifically on giving people the tips and tricks to coping if they're in that environment. Tell us about that.
But the reason that we wanted to put this book together is, there's so much to be said for the different ways of working from home, and actually what is the most healthy, happy and productive way to go about that. So that was kind of the heart of the book. And it's based on over 2,000 hours of research, and we spoke to clients, our community, people, like real people working from home as well. And what we identified was that whether you're a seasoned pro at doing it, and in some cases have been doing it 15 years, or some people who just started working, whichever way you look at it, people were similarly falling into similar habits that were a detriment to their health and well-being at work. So, getting up straight in the morning and flipping the laptop open, working longer hours just to show that they're working to their colleagues, to their teams, because you can't work next to each other. So it's that almost over-proving themselves, not putting boundaries in place. So a few tips that we share in the book, it's all based on evidence-based research, but not just having a good physical desk setup, but also looking at sort of like what colors are around you in the space, because colors can have a real impact on your mood and behavior as well. Ensuring that there's natural light in the room where possible, because that boosts the level of serotonin in the brain, which is linked to feelings of calm and happiness. Thinking about music as well, because like music has been shown to maximize learning and improve memory. So for some people, actually helps them aid concentration, so if you're that way inclined, then embrace that and pick certain tracks that might help boost your concentration levels while working. So we did all this research in those areas, but also the mindset approach. So when you're working from home and everything's in one place, having those designated spaces where you can just call work and, sleep and, something else, family time, and just separating it like that can help. But also, think about things you can do to boost your mindset. We've got a story in the book from this couple we spoke to. It was so sweet. They actually they realized these unhealthy habits were building. And so they shifted things around. So they got up in the morning and behaved and pretended like they were heading out to work. So they got dressed in nice clothes to feel like they were going to work. They, washed, changed, had breakfast, both went out, said goodbye to each other, walked around 2 blocks, separately. And
stood on the train platform, packed a packed lunch.
Yeah, exactly.
Put one foot on the train, got off.
Exactly that. So they got themselves in the mindset that they were going to work. So then by the time they got round, not only they'd had a bit of exercise as well in the morning, but they also rationalized, that would usually be when we're commuting anyway. So why not utilize this time in the morning how we used to? And I think that's a habit that a lot of people have fallen into with working from home. It's just get up and work. And it's like, well, think about what you would do usually. And actually, can you use that first hour of the day for self-care or for your mindset or for doing something that helps put you in a state of well-being before work, and then you're more likely to give your best work anyway. So
that's a great idea, and it also feeds back into having those conversations with the workplace, because if you feel the pressure to be responsive on demand because you're not as visible, because you're not sitting next to your colleagues, those are potentially things that should also be discussed with the workplace so that you can put those practical measures of walking to the train station in the morning into place.
Yeah, exactly.
Tanya, thank you so much for being on Sassi Talks today. I want us to summarise and deliver the key takeaways for this show. So we've had Tania Diggory on the programme today. She's an international mental health speaker. She's also the founder of Calma and talks to us about burnout and how we can prevent it. And she's also been giving us tips today on how we can increase our work-life balance and try to reduce our stress and anxiety potentially in the workplace. So Tanya, over to you. What are our 5 key takeaways? What are the main things or the main signs of burnout, and what can we do to avoid them?
Great. So thank you so much for having me on the show today. It's been a real pleasure to connect with you. Thank you. So in terms of takeaways, so we've talked about the fact that there is pressure, then there's stress, higher levels of stress, burnout, and habitual burnout. It's kind of like these 5 stages of burnout. So first tip is, recognizing, starting to become a little bit more aware of what feels like a sense of norm to you, where you've not got stress going on or as much stress, and noticing when things feel off kilter. Take a pause, take a breath, give yourself permission to take a step back from whatever's going on, to be with that and to do something that will help you in that moment, whether it is a simple breathing exercise or speaking to someone you trust or listening to music or doing something that helps just boost your mood to help you come into a state of feeling better in yourself. And the other tip is about, the fact that stress needs to come in ebbs and flows. We can't be like just accepting long-term stress as a norm. And that's something that I have heard, in my experience with, our clients and community. Sometimes you might hear someone say, I'm stressed, but everyone's stressed, aren't they? And we've got to be really careful that we don't normalize stress, because we're not designed to be stressed out human beings. So if you find yourself saying things like that, again, take a moment and reframe that in your mind. I don't have to be this stressed, and what can I do to take a step back? So those ebbs and flows are really important. Remembering that, so this is the third tip, remembering that workplace culture plays a big part into how you feel in your environment. So if you can, have a chat with your manager or someone else you trust in your workplace about what you think would be really helpful to boost conversation around mental health and well-being in your workplace, please do that. Remember that, your senior leaders have a duty of care to support their staff and, look after their health and safety. So you do have, a stance there, like to step forward and talk about it. Thinking about the fourth point, what you can do in your working day to help yourself and just in your life in general. You could write down all the things that help you reset, that help you feel re-energized, that you can tap into to manage and down-regulate that stress response in the brain when it's firing off. So write down a big list for yourself of things that can help you reset and keep that to hand so that you can reflect on it any time. And that's stuff you could do in your workplace or at home or just day to day. When you feel like things are getting a bit too much, just give yourself the chance to do something to help boost your well-being. And the final tip is around working from home. So, this is very common nowadays, and a lot more people are working from home. So not just thinking about the physical setup, but think about the mindset setup of your working from home life. So, what can you do for that first hour of the day where you would usually be commuting, to nurture self-care and to put yourself in the mindset that helps you feel well at work?
That's great. I'm definitely going to be doing that last one. I'm going to be putting on some great clothes, makeup, and going out for a morning coffee. That's what I'm going to do. And then bringing it back home and then starting my day. That's it. Set, sorted.
It's so easy to just stay in your comfy trousers and put on a t-shirt and just, it's great to be comfy, but it will shift your mindset.
You see all these images of people with the perfect top half, and then they've got pajama bottoms on the bottom half.
Exactly.
And then the doorbell rings and they've got to jump up and it's all over. It exposes everything. So yeah, no, that's great. Tanya, is there anything else you'd like to add before we leave?
Well, we've got an award-winning campaign called the Reignite Project, and it's free to get involved. So I really encourage anyone watching this to give it a try, especially if you feel like you might be highly stressed or burning out. So if you just go on our website, thisiskarma.com/reignite, it's our mission to reduce the issue of burnout in professionals by 10% by 2023. And that's based on the UK statistics. So that's 600,000 people that we want to impact within a 5-year period. And so you just sign up for free on the form on the page. You receive an ambassador pack to get involved and a 10-week free e-course providing burnout prevention strategies. So I hope that can be of use to you too.
Fantastic. We'll include those details down below in the programme, and we'll make sure that everybody has access to that. So that's brilliant. Thank you so much, Tanya. And thank you all of you for watching the show today. If this is your first time, welcome. Feel free to subscribe to our channel and also to our Instagram page, and we look forward to seeing you again on the next show.